In the ancient world, where women were often forgotten by history, one woman's name would echo through the ages with such profound significance that her story would become the foundation for the most important lineage in human history. But Ruth's journey to greatness began in the most unlikely place imaginable, not among the chosen people of Israel, but as a foreign woman from a despised nation, facing circumstances so desperate that death seemed like the only escape. The story begins during one of Israel's darkest periods, when famine ravaged the promised land like a merciless beast. A Hebrew man named Elimelech made a decision that would set in motion events no one could have predicted. Faced with starvation, he gathered his wife, Naomi, and their 2 sons, Mahlon and Chilion, and made the treacherous journey to Moab, enemy territory. What drove a faithful Hebrew family to abandon God's promised land for the homeland of their enemies? The answer lay in their empty grain stores and the hollow eyes of their starving children. But Moab would prove to be both salvation and curse. The family found food, but they also found something far more dangerous to their Hebrew identity: love. Mahlon and Chilion, now grown men, fell deeply in love with Moabite women. Mahlon married Ruth, while Chilion took Orpah as his bride. For 10 years, this unlikely Hebrew Moabite family lived in relative peace and prosperity, yet beneath this surface calm, a storm was brewing that would shatter their world completely. Death came calling with ruthless efficiency. First, Elimelech died, leaving Naomi a widow in a foreign land. Then, in a cruel twist that defied all logic and hope, both sons died as well, leaving behind their young wives but no children to carry on their names. In that ancient world, this was more than tragedy. It was a death sentence. 3 women, alone and childless in a society that valued women only for their ability to produce heirs, faced a future so bleak that survival itself seemed impossible. But what happened next would reveal the true character of these women and set the stage for one of history's most extraordinary acts of loyalty. When news reached Naomi that the famine in Israel had ended, she made the painful decision to return home. She urged her daughters-in-law to remain in Moab, where they might find new husbands and rebuild their lives. Orpah, after much weeping and soul-searching, chose the practical path. She kissed her mother-in-law goodbye and returned to her family. Ruth, however, made a choice that would echo through eternity. In one of the most beautiful declarations of loyalty ever recorded, she bound her fate to Naomi's with words that still move hearts today. She would go where Naomi went, live where Naomi lived, and make Naomi's people her people, and Naomi's God her God. But what drove Ruth to make such a radical decision? What did she see in this broken, bitter woman and her God that made her willing to abandon everything familiar? The journey back to Bethlehem revealed the depth of both women's desperation. Naomi, once prosperous and blessed, returned empty-handed and broken-spirited. The townspeople barely recognized her, and she bitterly proclaimed that God had dealt harshly with her. Ruth, meanwhile, found herself in a completely foreign culture, surrounded by people who viewed her with suspicion and disdain because of her Moabite heritage. Yet she had bound herself to this fate willingly. But why? What secret hope did she carry in her heart? The answer began to emerge when Ruth took the initiative to provide for their survival. In Israel, the law provided for the poor through a system called gleaning, the right to gather leftover grain after the harvesters had finished. But for Ruth, this meant venturing into fields where she might face harassment or worse as a foreign woman. She asked Naomi's permission to glean, and by what seemed like pure chance, she ended up in the field belonging to Boaz, a wealthy landowner who happened to be related to Naomi's deceased husband. But was it really chance? The moment Boaz noticed Ruth among the gleaners, something extraordinary began to unfold. This powerful man, who could have ignored or dismissed the foreign widow, instead went out of his way to protect and provide for her. He instructed his workers to deliberately leave extra grain for her to find and ensured that no one would harm or harass her. When Ruth asked why he showed such kindness to a foreigner, Boaz revealed that he had heard about her loyalty to Naomi and her sacrifice in leaving her homeland. Yet there was something more in Boaz's eyes when he looked at Ruth, something that went beyond mere admiration for her character. Could it be that this encounter was part of a divine plan much grander than either of them realized? The signs were there for those who knew how to read them. Boaz's generosity went far beyond what custom required, and Ruth's heart began to hope for something she had never dared imagine. As the harvest season progressed, Ruth continued to glean in Boaz's fields, and their interactions grew warmer and more meaningful. But both seemed to hold back, constrained by social conventions and the complexity of their situation. Ruth was not just a widow, she was a foreign widow. Boaz was not just any man. He was a man of influence and wealth who could have his pick of wives. What future could there possibly be for them? The breakthrough came through Naomi's cunning wisdom. Despite her earlier bitterness, she had been watching the developing relationship between Ruth and Boaz with growing excitement. She recognized what both younger people were too cautious to act upon. They were falling in love. But more than that, she realized that Boaz was a kinsman redeemer, a family member who had the legal right and responsibility to marry Ruth and preserve her deceased husband's name and inheritance. Naomi's plan was audacious and risky. She instructed Ruth to perform a nighttime ritual that would essentially propose marriage to Boaz. Ruth was to wait until Boaz had eaten and drunk well at the threshing floor, then secretly lie down at his feet after he had fallen asleep. When he awakened, she was to ask him to spread his covering over her, a symbolic request for marriage and protection. The plan worked, but not without heart-stopping complications. When Boaz awakened in the middle of the night to find Ruth at his feet, he was initially startled. But when she made her request, his response revealed the depth of his character and the magnitude of the obstacle they faced. He was honored by her request and called her a woman of noble character, but there was a problem that could destroy everything. There was another kinsman redeemer who had a prior claim to Ruth. What followed was a masterclass in ancient legal maneuvering and divine providence. Boaz could not simply marry Ruth. He had to give the closer relative the first opportunity to fulfill the kinsman redeemer role. But this presented a seemingly impossible dilemma. If the other man chose to redeem Ruth, she would be lost to Boaz forever. If he refused, it would be seen as a rejection of family duty, but it would clear the way for Boaz to act. The tension reached its peak when Boaz confronted the unnamed kinsman redeemer at the town gate, where legal matters were settled publicly. Initially, when Boaz mentioned only the land that belonged to Naomi's family, the man was eager to redeem it. Land was always a good investment. But then Boaz revealed the catch. Whoever redeemed the land must also marry Ruth to preserve the family line. Any children from that marriage would inherit the redeemed land, meaning the kinsman redeemer would invest his money but gain no permanent inheritance for his own family line. The calculation was swift and heartless. The kinsman redeemer withdrew his claim, concerned only with his own financial interests. In that moment of rejection, Ruth's future hung in the balance. Would she be condemned to remain a childless widow forever, or would love and providence prevail? Boaz immediately stepped forward to claim his rights as the next kinsman redeemer. In front of the town elders and witnesses, he declared his intention to redeem both the land and Ruth. The crowd erupted in celebration, blessing the union and prophetically declaring that Ruth would be like Rachel and Leah, the founding mothers of Israel. But they spoke more truly than they knew. Ruth was about to become something far more significant than even they imagined. The wedding celebration that followed was more than just the union of two people who had found love against all odds. It represented the healing of old wounds and the breaking down of ancient barriers. Ruth, the Moabite woman who had once been an outsider and foreigner, was now fully embraced as a daughter of Israel. Her loyalty had been rewarded, her faith vindicated, and her love fulfilled. But the greatest blessing was yet to come. Ruth conceived and bore a son, and the joy that filled Bethlehem was extraordinary. Naomi, who had returned home bitter and empty, now held her grandson in her arms. The women of the town declared that Ruth was worth more to Naomi than 7 sons, the highest compliment they could pay to any woman in that culture. They named the child Obed, meaning servant or worshipper. But this baby boy would become far more than his humble name suggested. As Obed grew to manhood, he would father a son named Jesse, and Jesse would become the father of David, the greatest king in Israel's history, the man after God's own heart, whose reign would be remembered as the golden age of the nation. Yet even David's significance pales in comparison to what would come through Ruth's lineage. 1,000 years later, another descendant would be born in Bethlehem, Jesus of Nazareth, whom Christians believe to be the promised Messiah, the Savior of the world. The genealogy recorded in the Gospel of Matthew specifically mentions Ruth among the women in Jesus' family line, honoring her as one of the foundational mothers of the most important family in human history. Think about the staggering implications of Ruth's story. A pagan woman from a despised nation, who had every reason to abandon her mother-in-law and return to the familiar, instead chose loyalty and faith. That single decision set in motion a chain of events that would ultimately lead to the birth of the one Christians believe came to save humanity. If Ruth had chosen differently, if she had followed Orpah back to Moab, the entire trajectory of biblical history might have been altered. But Ruth's importance extends far beyond her role in the messianic lineage. Her story shatters the ethnic and religious barriers that seemed so important to the ancient world. She proves that God's love and calling are not limited by nationality, gender, or social status. The God of Israel embraced this foreign woman so completely that she became one of the most honored figures in biblical history. Ruth's character also provides a timeless model of loyalty, courage, and faith. In a world where people often abandon relationships when they become difficult or inconvenient, Ruth's commitment to Naomi stands as a beacon of steadfast love. She chose the harder path, the uncertain path, the path that required her to trust in a God she was still learning to know. Her story also demonstrates the power of redemption, not just the legal redemption that Boaz provided, but the deeper spiritual redemption that transforms lives and histories. Ruth went from being a childless widow with no future to becoming the great-grandmother of kings and an ancestor of the Messiah. Her transformation is so complete that by the end of her story, no one remembers her as Ruth the Moabite. She has become simply Ruth, beloved daughter of Israel. The book of Ruth also reveals God's providence working through ordinary human choices and circumstances. Every decision. Elimelech's move to Moab, Ruth's loyalty to Naomi, her choice to glean in Boaz's field, Naomi's matchmaking scheme, the other kinsman, Redeemer's rejection, work together to accomplish purposes far greater than any individual could have imagined. Perhaps most remarkably, Ruth's story shows how God can bring beauty from ashes, hope from despair, and eternal significance from humble circumstances. What began as a tale of famine, death, and desolation became a love story that changed the world. Ruth's willingness to step into an uncertain future with faith and loyalty created ripples that are still felt today. In our modern world, where change is rapid and relationships are often temporary, Ruth's example challenges us to consider what really matters. Her story asks us, what are we willing to sacrifice for love and loyalty? How do we respond when life doesn't go according to our plans? Can we trust that our small acts of faithfulness might be part of a larger story we cannot yet see? Ruth reminds us that ordinary people can play extraordinary roles in God's plan. She was not a prophet or a queen, not wealthy or powerful in conventional terms. She was simply a woman who chose love over convenience, faith over fear, and loyalty over personal comfort. Yet, through these choices, she became one of the most important women in human history. The story of Ruth ultimately reveals that no one is too foreign, too broken, or too ordinary to be used in God's great purposes. Her legacy lives on not just in the genealogies of kings and the lineage of the Messiah, but in every person who chooses to love sacrificially, to remain loyal in difficult circumstances, and to trust that their faithfulness matters, even when they cannot see the full picture. Ruth's journey from desperate widow to honored matriarch proves that with faith, loyalty, and love, the most unlikely people can become the ancestors of hope itself. Her story continues to inspire because it reminds us that in God's economy, nothing is wasted, no act of kindness is forgotten, and no person is beyond the reach of redemption and purpose. This is why Ruth truly deserves to be called the most important woman in the Bible, not just for what she accomplished, but for what she represents: the transformative power of loyalty, the triumph of love over circumstance, and the amazing truth that God's greatest works often come through the most humble and unexpected vessels. Share this video with someone, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories from the Bible, like, and leave a comment below.